We turn these ones off up here too, lights crew.
Afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be here again. Hello to everyone watching at home as well. I shared this presentation about a month ago at Aldinga, and Pastor Chris asked me if I could do it here as well. So if you were there, I'm sorry. But I've titled this presentation King of the Mountain, and I have shared some of these slides a little while ago, but there's some new information here as well. So I just was doing a bit of research into something, so I'll just play around with this, make sure it's working. Perfect. Okay, so King of the Mountain, sorry Tony. I don't know if he's, I saw him up there. It's not this kind of, there he is, not that kind of King of the Mountain, sorry Tony, not tonight, maybe another day. This one was on the weekend as well, not talking about that kind of King of the Mountain, unfortunately, for the motor enthusiasts. For those that are inclined to climb the corporate ladder, you might have dreams of becoming this type of king of the mountain, but that's probably not applicable to many of us here today. This one's my kind of king of the mountain, where you're just alone with your thoughts, at peace, without the noise and distraction of the world and your children and whoever else you can put into that category, just being the master of your own universe. But tonight I wanted to have a look at a very particular mountain, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And the reason I gave this presentation a little while ago was due to the escalation in events over there. But I'm not going to be particularly looking at that tonight, but obviously we're aware there's a conflict going on in Jerusalem, over in Israel at the moment, and there's trouble over there. But I wanted to look at particularly the mountain itself tonight. So often we read scriptures to do with Jerusalem, but tonight we're going to be looking at the mountain that Jerusalem is built on. So I'm sorry if you don't like history. Tonight is going to be a little bit of a history lesson, but I think that when you understand the history of something, you have a bit of an appreciation for what's happened in the past, you can understand the present a little bit more. And I happen to love history, so you'll have to bear with me a little bit. It's one of the main reasons I studied architecture, because I loved old buildings and things like that. So there's a little bit of that in there tonight as well. Okay, my clicker's stopped working. Will it work if I go back? All right, let's try it. Okay. So the Temple Mount is home to three, what I will call faiths, three different religions, primarily. So you have Judaism, or the Jewish people. The Temple Mount is known as Har Habayit. I'm going to apologise in advance for my Hebrew, my Arabic, and probably my English as well. Har Habayit, which means Mount of the House, and we literally sung a song about that in the first meeting. It comes from in the book of Micah. I'm just going to read this verse. I should have had this prepared before, sorry. So the book of Micah, chapter 4 and verse 1. In the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it. And many nations shall come and say, Come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, and to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For the law shall go forth of Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So we sing that song, I forgot what's called. Come and let us go. Thank you, Jill. Come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord. So that's literally what that means, the mount of the house. And as we know, it stopped working again. Does this time out if I stop clicking it? Okay. So it's home to the temple of the Lord, which we can read about in the Bible. In Islam has a claim to the mountain as well. In Islam, it's known as Haram al-Sharif, or the Noble Sanctuary. And there's two significant structures on the site. You'll know this one, which is the Qubat as-Sakhra, or the Dome of the Rock. And we're going to have a look at that in a little bit. There's also a mosque on the site as well, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And then thirdly, we have what I've called Christianity, sort of mainstream Orthodox Christianity. So Catholic Church, Greek Orthodox, all those sort of churches. It's just known as the Temple Mount, and not that this building is on the Temple Mount, but it's nearby. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So we're going to look at these three different factions, if you like, or different belief systems, and look at why the Temple Mount is significant to each different group of people, and I guess understand a little bit better some of the tensions that revolve around Jerusalem and the wider area. So you can see there on the photo there, you've got the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount, and the mosque is actually down. I'm going to try this. Oh yeah, there it goes. So there's the Dome of the Rock in the sort of the middle of the big compound there, and that's the mosque. So the very dominant features of the modern day Temple Mount. But if we have a read here, I need to move my notes away from the screen so I can read what the screen says. I don't know how I'm going to do that, like that. So in Zechariah chapter 12, verse 2, we know this one well. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. But this next verse is, to me, more interesting. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. So I thought that phrase, a burdensome stone, was interesting. So I've done a bit of research into that. So that's sort of where we're going. So this is a map of the land of Israel, sort of Old Testament days. And you can see in the centre, I'm going to try it this way this time. Oh yeah. So you've got the Dead Sea to the south and the Sea of Galilee to the north, and sort of connecting the two, you've got the River Jordan. Either side of the River Jordan, you've got those two mountain ranges. And a lot of the cities of Israel were built up into the mountains. And as you can understand, in the olden days, a city in the mountains was hard to attack, hard to conquer. So a lot of cities have these natural defence systems. If we have a bit of a closer look, you can see Jerusalem there is up in the mountains. A few names of note there. You've got the Mount of Olives. Oh no, I pressed the wrong button. Mount of Olives, Mount Moriah is one we're going to be looking at a little bit. And just to, I guess, have a bit of a, like I said, I just found some of these things interesting, so we're going to be doing a bit of research into that. So here I've got a bit of an artist's impression of Jerusalem, which is around the time of Jesus. So you can see off to the side there is the Temple Mount with the temple on it. This is actually Herod's temple, which I'll go into more detail about that later. Behind the temple area, you've got the Roman garrison. So, the Romans weren't silly people. They knew where the trouble was going to be, and that's usually where they set up their military. So right next door, I'm going to do it this way because I can see where I'm pointing. Down here is the old city of Jerusalem. I don't know why it's clicking off like that, but you can see that's what they call the city of David. So that was sort of the original city, and you can see over time how it expanded off to the top sort of area up here. You've got the Roman style buildings. So this is, after Roman occupation, it's becoming more civilized, But yeah, quite a big city for the day. And you can see there that the whole city is sort of built on this mountain plateau. Can you see that? And then there's all these valleys that sort of surround it. So you can imagine it would have been quite a hard city to conquer. When David attacked it, Jerusalem, as it used to be known, you can see it would have been quite an effort to do that. So they obviously had the Lord with them to be able to achieve that. back in the days before, siege weaponry and things like that. Just off to the side of the image there, over on that side, the eastern side is where the Mount of Olives is, just over there. That's the valley, and then up there somewhere is the Mount of Olives. So these are sort of prominent places in the time of Jesus when he was in the city. So here I've got a map of the old city of Jerusalem, or the Temple Mount area, and this is actually an Islamic map, and you can tell that by what they called the area. So it's not called Temple Mount on there, it's called the Haram Sharif. You can see that, in there. I've pressed too many buttons in there. But and you can see the Dome of the Rock right there, the Kibbutz al-Sakhra. Now, Moriah is something that particularly took my interest, because that's mentioned in the Bible. And it's really important to understand that to the Jewish people, the Temple Mount area is Mount Moriah. And we're going to look at a few scriptures into why they believe that. So remember that, Mount Moriah. So this is sort of a bit of an outline of what we're talking about, the area. So you can see there, that dashed line sort of shows the top of the mountain, or the plateau area. That is what they call Mount Moriah. That's the top of it. It's in a bunch of mountain ranges, so it doesn't particularly look like a mountain when you're there, but it's up in the mountains, and this particular peak, that's the word I was looking for before, is known as Mount Moriah. And you can see there that all the roads that are sort of going around, that's where the valleys used to be. So they've sort of obviously built the city and expanded it based on the contours of what was there before. So first I want to look at the Jewish significance of the site. And I've got a few different scriptures to look at here. So the first one is what's known as the binding of Isaac, or the story in Genesis 22. And we know this story when Abraham is asked to offer up his son Isaac in sacrifice. And if we read here in verse 2, it says, "And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of." So we know the story well. I'm going to try and gloss over a few of these things, but God asked Abraham to offer up his son, the same son Abraham waited 25 years for the promise to be fulfilled of this promised child Isaac. And Abraham, being the man of faith that he was prepared to do what God asked him to do. And we know the story that thankfully the angel of the Lord intervenes and sort of says to Abraham, you don't need to do it, it's okay, I've seen that you're a man of faith. And Abraham calls the place Jehovah Jireh, or God will see to it. And Jehovah Jireh is a symbolic name for Mount Moriah. So quite often when it says Jehovah Jireh as a place in the Bible, it's referring to Mount Moriah. So as I mentioned before, it's obviously the site of Solomon's temple as well. And in 2 Chronicles chapter 3, we have God's instruction, or God instructed David to prepare the materials, and then Solomon, we read here in verse 1, began to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem in Mount Moriah, where the Lord appeared unto David his father, in the place that David had prepared in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. So I'm only going to pick a few of these details to look at tonight, but there's so much you could look into with the construction of the temple. But like I said earlier, the important part tonight is to remember that the Jews believe that the temple was built on the same site as Abraham's sacrifice, and to them that has a lot of importance. So just got a bit of an artist's impression there of the temple, and I've actually got some videos coming up shortly that show some a bit of animation inside what it looked like as well. But you can see there, there's a bit of a cross-section of what it might have looked like inside. And you might notice, or you might remember from the scriptures, that everything on the inside of the temple was covered in gold. And in 1 Chronicles chapter 22, in verse 14, it says that David had gathered 100,000 talents of gold and 1,000,000 talents of silver, and also brass and iron without weight. So a lot of stuff he gathered. I don't know where he kept it. Must have had a big cave or something where they kept all these things in preparation for Solomon to build the temple. Now, I crunched some numbers on what that might be worth today. So if you disagree with my number crunching, come and see me afterwards. But according to my Bible dictionary, talent of gold weighed 200 pounds, or about 90 kilos, just over 90 kilos, 1 talent. This is gold we're talking about. A talent of silver, a slightly different measurement, was 100 pounds, or about 45 kilos. So, based on today's price of gold, 100,000 talents of gold, which is a little over 9 million kilos of gold, based on the price per kilo yesterday, $99,315.50 a kilo, is almost $901 billion of gold. All right, that's just the gold. The historians estimate that it was about half of the known mined gold in the whole world that David had prepared. We'll say prepared. I'm sure some of it was probably plundered or bought or however he got it all. But that's a lot. Now the silver was 1,000,000 talents, so more weight, but obviously less valuable. Yesterday's price of silver, so it comes to about 45 million kilos of silver. Yesterday's price, $1,165 a kilo, almost $53 billion worth of, this is Australian dollars, worth of silver. So you put those things together, it's nearly $1 trillion of gold and silver, just gold and silver, forget about everything else. So quite a lot of resources, and you can see why the Romans liked the look of it when they came to conquer after Jesus' time. So now, hopefully, I've got a video that's hopefully going to work, and it's hopefully going to have sound.
Solomon's temple stood in Jerusalem for almost 400 years. It was the crown jewel of Jerusalem and the center of worship to the Lord. Almost half of the Old Testament writings took place during the time when Solomon's temple was still standing. Understanding the significance of its location, history, and design can greatly add to one's reverence for one of the most holy places in the world. The city of Jerusalem is located in an area of 3 major valleys: the Hinnom, the Central or Tyropoeon, and the Kidron Valley. The mountain range between the Central and Kidron Valley is called Mount Moriah. The peak of the mountain is a large protruding flat rock, which is now located under the dome of the rock. According to Genesis 22:2, Abraham was commanded to sacrifice Isaac in the region of Moriah, connecting the Temple Mount with this significant event. At the time of King David, the area of Jerusalem was controlled by the Jebusites, the city only occupying the southern part of the central ridge. When David captured the city in about 1000 BC, he made Jerusalem his capital. David then moved the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem and began preparations for building a permanent structure to replace the portable tabernacle of Moses that had been used for over 400 years. With the ancient city of Jerusalem being fairly small, David purchased the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite so he could expand the size of the city. Being higher than the city of David, the hilltop would make a beautiful place to build the temple of the Lord. Under the reign of David's son, King Solomon, the temple construction began. After 7 years of construction in about 960 BC, Solomon finished building the temple, most likely built over the same protruding rock of Mount Moriah. Solomon also built himself a new palace just south of the temple and expanded the walls of the city up towards the peak of Mount Moriah.
Okay, just a couple of things to note there. Don't hold it against me, all the dates, Pastor Jock and Helen, that's not my video. One of the important things to note in that video was the rock, the protruding rock. That's the rock that I'm talking about. So keep that in mind, and we'll play the next one. This one's just a look inside.
Solomon's temple was not only a landmark for the city of Jerusalem, but more importantly, the dwelling place of the Lord. The layout represented Israel's progression back into God's presence and was designed to teach Israel that it was only through the infinite sacrifice of the sinless Messiah that they could once again enjoy the presence of the Lord.
So you heard there in the video, and this part does line up with scriptures, it took 7 years to build the temple. Interestingly, it took Solomon 13 years to build his house, his palace. So make of that what you will. But we know what happened to Solomon. Maybe he needed a lot of extra en-suites, I'm not sure. Okay, so now I'm going to look at this thing called what the Jewish people called the foundation stone. And it's quite interesting. I had never heard of this before until I started looking into it. Is anybody here familiar with that term? Has anyone heard of the foundation stone before? No? It's not in the Bible. That's probably why you haven't heard of it. But I'm going to put the Bible to the side just for a second. We know the history of the Jewish people that when the temple was destroyed. Sorry, I'll go back. The way that the Levites and the priests taught the people was verbally. That was the way God had laid it out, and you would come to the temple. And the temple was a place of learning about the Lord, but also about the culture of what it had become by the time of Jesus. It was more of a cultural centre. So all their theology, their culture, the bank was there. All of these, it was the centre of Jewish society, was the temple. Now, when the Romans destroyed the temple, the Levites and the priests and things, they had to sort of work out, well, how are we going to teach the people now? We don't have somewhere for them to come. So they started writing. And there's this book which the Jews call the Talmud, which is sort of their primary resource of religious law, theology, culture, which includes the Torah, the Old Testament, the books of the law and the Old Testament and all that sort of stuff, but it also has other things in it, like historical writings, commentaries on the scriptures. It's sort of like a cultural book as well as the Old Testament. So in the Talmud, which I haven't read, but I've sort of picked out a few pieces that I found. So like I said, it began being compiled after AD 70 when the temple was destroyed. And in the Talmud is where this term, the foundation stone, first comes about. So according to the Talmud, the foundation stone, what they believe culturally, I guess it's sort of become their religious beliefs as well, is that the foundation stone, which was that rock at the top of the mountain, they believe that was actually the origin of creation. So that was the first thing God made. And from there, everything expanded but that was the first thing God made, that rock, and that's why the rock is important to them. Well, that's one of the reasons. They believe I don't know why they believe this or where they get this from, but it's where they believe God gathered the earth or the dirt that formed Adam. I don't know why he didn't get it from the Garden of Eden, but apparently this is where he got it from. Like I said earlier, it's the site of the binding of Isaac or Abraham's sacrifice or attempted sacrifice of Isaac. They believe it's the same place as Jacob's dream, where he dreams of Jacob's ladder. So we talk about Pastor Jock and Helen have got a lot of writings on the stone, the stone of what's become the stone of destiny and all those things. They believe this is where that comes from. And they believe, like you saw in the video, the temple was built over the top of it, and the Holy of Holies in the temple was on top of that rock. So to the Jewish people, that rock is sort of the most important thing in the world. And they believe that's where the Ark of the Covenant sat. So that was God's presence on that rock. This is what the rock looks like. So you can still see it today. Anyone want to take a guess where it is? That's right under this thing. Hence the name Dome of the Rock. That's what it's based on. Now, the Muslims call it the Noble Rock. So they give it a different name, but they're talking about the same thing. So you can immediately see why there's tension, because they both, I'm quite sure, the Muslims the Arabs and the Jews are related. We know through Ishmael and Isaac. So they would have known the stories. They would have known about God and Abraham and all that sort of stuff. So I'm quite sure that was very deliberate. Now, I found this in the Talmud. I found this text which is sort of illustrates how important this rock is to the Jewish faith, I'll call it. It says, as the navel is set in the center of this is a bit of poetry. As the navel is set in the center of the human body, so is the land of Israel, the navel of the world, situated in the center of the world, and Jerusalem in the center of the land of Israel, and the sanctuary in the center of Jerusalem, and the holy place in the center of the sanctuary, and the ark in the center of the holy place, and the foundation stone before the holy place, because from it the world was founded. So it's quite important to them. And they don't muck around with it. So this is a sign on the western wall, or the Wailing Wall of the temple compound. And you can read there, it says, according to the Torah law, entering the Temple Mount area is strictly forbidden due to the holiness of the site. Now, the Muslims don't let the Jews up there anyway. But, you know, if you remember in the Old Testament, nobody was allowed into the temple except the priests, and no one was allowed into the Holy of Holies except the high priest. So they believe the Holy of Holies is up there, and if you accidentally walk in there, you'll get zapped by God. So we can't have that, so we'll put up a sign. It actually reminds me, when Stevie and I went to Vanuatu a few years ago on a rally, and we went and had a look at this volcano, live erupting volcano, and you walk up there, and there's a little rope to sort of help you climb up, and then you get to the top of it. I don't know what you call it, the top of a volcano. You look down into it. There's nothing there to stop you, and there's just a little sign that says "Think safety." I was like, that's great. Well, that's sort of what this is saying. Think safety. Don't go up there. It's too dangerous. So quickly, I'm just going to brush over the timeline of the temple, because that is obviously a significant part of the story. So Solomon's temple, first constructed late 11th to mid 10th century BC. I've gone for windows, not direct dates, just to keep myself safe. But we do know the temple was destroyed, the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC. Is that right? Thank you. Then we have Zerubbabel's temple, which is when they go back under the Babylonian sort of permission to go back and rebuild the temple and the walls and things. So that's sort of known as the second temple, or Zerubbabel's temple. Then we come to Herod's temple, which wasn't really a new one. It was sort of like a renovation, and he just sort of spruced it up a little bit, which is eventually destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. So I have a bit of a map here of a few years before the temple is destroyed. You can see up there in the top there, it says circa 63 AD. And you can see there some of those same things that we saw in the other photo earlier. You got the temple compound up the top there with the Roman garrison next door. You might notice a few other things out here that are interesting. Golgotha, tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, which is where Jesus was to be buried, things like that. And yeah, we'll come to that shortly. So just on the destruction of the temple, this is a photo that I took when I was in Rome of the Arch of Titus, which was what they call a triumphal arch, which the Romans used to build to sort of boast their victories, their military victories. So General Titus, who later became the emperor after his father died, they crushed the Jewish rebellion in Judea, and they built this as a monument to sort of, like I said, to sort of glory in it. And if you take a bit of a closer look, you can see here they're showing the spoils of war. So all the things that they took out of the temple, you've got the golden candlesticks, the show tables, and all different bits and pieces that they took out of the temple, remembering that everything was gold, so everything was valuable. And, you know, who knows whatever treasures they found there. Like I said earlier, the temple complex was more than just the temple. It had become marketplaces, and there was also the bank. So just, you know, in Jesus' day, the bank was at the temple. So I'm sure all of it ended up in Rome, one way or another. So next I'm going to look at the Muslim significance of the Temple Mount. And like I said, the main feature there is the Dome of the Rock, which is actually a shrine. It's not a mosque. It's a shrine to commemorate what's called the Muhammad's night journey. So the night journey is something that is integral to the Islamic faith. It's made up of two parts called the Isra and the Miraj. And this is where Muhammad takes a sort of a journey from Mecca to Jerusalem, and he ascends into heaven. And so you might have heard some of these things, but not necessarily what they're called. But the basic belief is that Muhammad travelled to Jerusalem on the back of a winged beast. I don't know where he found that, but ends up in Jerusalem, and he comes to the Temple Mount and he meets some prophets and he leads them in prayer, and then he goes over to the side of the Dome of the Rock and he ascends into heaven, where he meets some prophets and Allah. Now, just looking at the Dome of the Rock itself, like I said, it's a shrine built to commemorate that ascension into heaven. Built in 692 AD, it's actually the oldest surviving Islamic structure in the world. So from a cultural standpoint, from an architectural standpoint, it's a very significant and important building. And it's had several refurbishments over the centuries. So that dome there, which is gold now, was originally lead, and then upgraded to bronze and finally to gold only in the 20th century, about in the 1960s that happened. In 1993, it was refurbished to its current appearance. So that's how we see it today, thanks to a kind donation by the King of Jordan, who sold one of his houses in London to fund the 80 kilos of gold. So remember, so that dome is 80 kilos of gold. The temple had 900 million kilos of gold or something ridiculous. So just to put it in context for you. So the King of Jordan had to sell one house in London to fund that. It was about $8 million US in 1993. So he lost out. He should have kept it. It would have been worth a lot more now, wouldn't it, that house? So this is a tapestry depicting the Isra Miraj, like I said. And the story goes that Muhammad ascends through the 7 levels of heaven with the angel Gabriel. And at each level, he meets a different prophet. Now listen to the names of these prophets. The first level was Adam. The second level, John the Baptist and Jesus. Third level, Joseph. Fourth level, Enoch. Fifth level, Aaron. Sixth level, Moses. Seventh level, Abraham. They're all pretty familiar names to us, aren't they? I wonder where they got those names from. So after meeting these different prophets, he eventually meets Allah or God, and they have a conversation, which is very similar to the story in Genesis between God and Abraham. If you remember the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where Abraham negotiates with God on how many righteous people they can find in the city, this is almost the exact same story with the same numbers, except in this case, Muhammad is negotiating with Allah about how many times to pray per day. So originally starts at 50, and he gets him down to 5 times a day. And that's why the Muslims pray 5 times a day. It's all based on this story. So like I said, you've got the Al-Aqsa Mosque there, which is considered the 3rd holiest site in Islam. So this is not the Dome of the Rock, but this is a different building. And it's where the night journey started. So he lands at the site of the mosque and then goes across to the Dome of the Rock. And originally, I didn't know this, but Muslims pray towards Mecca, but originally they prayed towards this mosque in Jerusalem. But at some point they decided we can't be praying to Jerusalem, so they changed that. And it was actually the second mosque to be built ever. And Al-Aqsa means the furthest mosque. So I'm sure that's not true anymore, but back in those days it was, pretty far away from where Muhammad was from. So this is it here, that's the front. Just show a few photos briefly. This is it from the side. So that same side we looked at earlier, that's the wall of the temple complex, and then you've got the mosque hanging right on the edge there. It's quite a big building. You can see it there on on the Temple Mount there with the Dome of the Rock in the centre, and it's off to the bottom here. Inside, each of those sort of red shapes, which I tried to look up what they were called, but I couldn't find an exact name for it. But that is one position to pray on the floor. And there's 4,000. So 4,000 people at one time can go in to pray. So it's quite a big building. Very tight, but obviously, yeah, when you're sort of kneeling down praying, you don't need much space. So 4,000 in there. Now, so I've looked at the first two. Quickly, I'm going to try and gloss through this one. So I've called it Christian significance because, like I said, it's more from a historical, mainstream point of view, not necessarily our point of view. And the Temple Mount is basically a site of prophecy being fulfilled. And in Matthew 24, Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another, which to me has now a new interesting meaning, not just talking about the temple perhaps, but perhaps the foundation stone thing, that shall not be thrown down. This is just an image of that, of when it was destroyed, supposedly by fire. So Jerusalem over the centuries has been known as the Holy City, and under the Christian era, so, in the AD years, the focus shifts from the temple, which is not there anymore, which is Old Testament, to Jesus in the New Testament. And I've just picked up a few key points in history where things were quite significant. So we know the story of Constantine's conversion, Emperor Constantine in 312 AD, where he has this vision that says, in this sign you shall conquer, and apparently he sees the sign of the cross in the sky. And so he converts to being a Christian, and then the next year, 313, they have this Edict of Milan, which proclaims religious tolerance for Christians. So previously it had been outlawed, so if you were a Christian, you were in big trouble in the Roman Empire, but from 313 AD it was all good. Now, apparently, Constantine had this desire to find the tomb of Jesus. So what do you do when you can't find something? You ask your mum, don't you? Mum knows where everything is. So that's what Constantine did. So he sends his mum from Constantinople to Jerusalem on a quest to find the tomb where Jesus was buried. And like a good mum, she did. She found it. And not only that, she also found the site of his crucifixion as well. And I showed on that map earlier, Golgotha or Calvary. And conveniently, the two things were pretty close together. So upon receiving this conveniently great news, Constantine commissions a great church to be built over the site. So this is known as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is built in 326 AD, or finished. And from that point, it becomes a site of pilgrimage over the centuries. And we know that the Christians and the Muslims fought over Jerusalem, the holy city, through the Crusades and through time, because, it was, like I said, it was considered holy to all sides. So this church becomes a really important thing, probably the first tourism venture that ever existed, I reckon. So this is it. It's quite a complex building. It's been expanded and extended in multiple different directions over the centuries. So that blue dome was sort of the original, like a Roman structure, and then it's sort of been added onto over time. Most of the traditional Orthodox churches, sort of East and West, have headquarters or offices in there. So it's not just a place of pilgrimage or tourism, but it's also a workplace, as well as an operating church. So this Church of the Holy Sepulchre is considered to contain the two holiest sites in Christianity. Like I said, Calvary or Golgotha, which is the site of the crucifixion, and also Jesus' tomb or the resurrection. Now, I'll just point out that we particularly don't really mind or care where those places are. It's the events that are important to us, not necessarily where, but this is what the common belief is. So you can see here, this image shows it quite nicely how the church was built over what they found. So if I have a look down here, so first they found Golgotha, which is sort of just on the ground, and then they sort of found this cave, and then they found the tomb. So you can see there they've sort of excavated all of that area and built a big whopping church over the top. So inside, this is what it looks like. So on the left there, you've got that circle, that ring is supposedly the place where the cross was erected. I'm guessing that artwork wasn't there before. And then on the right is what they say is the evidence that they call it the Rock of Calvary, and that sort of fissure in the rock is evidence of earthquake damage. So that's how they say, well, that's the site, because if you remember in the scriptures, it talks about there was a great earthquake on the day that Jesus rose from the dead. So that's how they sort of pull it all together nicely. And it's built, this little chapel is built over the top of it, known as the Edicule, and this is directly underneath that big blue dome. So there's a building in a building. And like I said, this is supposedly built over Jesus' tomb, and you can go inside and have a look. So that sort of slab of marble down there is supposedly, that there's a slab of marble on top, which supposedly covers the burial bed of where Jesus laid. That's what the claim is. And yeah, like I said, I don't necessarily believe all of these things, but this is what is believed, and this is why people are willing to fight over these things. This is looking up at that dome, and you can see there the sunburst, which we know of the sort of the pagan symbolism in it, but supposedly it represents the 12 apostles, those 12 sunbeams. But if you ask Sister Helen, she'll be able to teach you otherwise. I don't have time to go into a lot of these things. I'm trying to gloss it. There's a lot of information. I'm just trying to gloss over it quickly. So who is the king of the mountain? The answer is obvious, really. It's not the Jews with their temple, and we know it's not the Muslims with their shrine or their mosque. And it's not even the Christians with their church, is it? These things are just buildings. But the real King of Kings is Jesus Christ himself. And we can read in John chapter 14, in verse 6, it says, Jesus said unto him, I am the way, the truth, the life. No man comes unto the Father but by me. So, Jesus himself descended, Pastor Paul touched on it today, descended from his Father's realm, from the heavenly realm, to show us the way to God, to teach us the truth, and to set us free, from sin and death, and giving us the gift of eternal life, or at least a chance to have eternal life. I've got another verse here in John chapter 4, another famous passage, verse 21. Jesus said unto her, talking about the woman of Samaria, Believe me, the hour comes when you shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. So we don't need to worship God via the mountain anymore. We don't need to worship God via Jerusalem anymore. We can worship God directly and individually. And Pastor Paul touched on that earlier this afternoon. When Christ made the way for us by his perfect sacrifice, when we repent of our old way of life, when we get baptized in water, when we receive the gift of the Holy Ghost, these things enable us to pray to God and to worship him in spirit and in truth. And perhaps if you're new here this afternoon and these things are all new to you, then, and I'm quite sure the person alongside you will be happy to go through some scriptures with you. I've sort of run out of time to do that, or if you're viewing online and you're hearing these things for the first time, reach out. You know where to find us. Reach out and come and see these things for yourself. Because not only is Jesus the King of Kings, but he's also the coming King. And this is the day that we all look forward to. And there's a verse in Zechariah 14 that says, His feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst. Now, interestingly, so in Jewish, the Jews believe that Messiah, they believe, just paraphrasing, they don't believe that Jesus Christ was the Messiah. They're still waiting for him to come. And they believe, as per this verse, that he will descend on the Mount of Olives and enter into Jerusalem, through the Golden Gate, which which is on the east, which is this. This is the Golden Gate. And the Muslims are historically known for their wisdom and their cunning. And after learning of the prophecy of Jesus, they conveniently sealed it shut so he can't get in. And that's true. That's legitimately true. But I don't think somehow a few stones is going to stop him. There's a lot of things in history that are impossible, that somehow God finds a way. So Jesus used to teach his followers in the Mount of Olives, humbly, But when he returns as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, he's not going to come as that humble servant. He's coming as the Son of God in power and glory. And he'll come to teach again. But I don't think there'll be many that enjoy the lesson, because it'll be a day of reckoning. So just in closing, perhaps the conflict in Israel at the moment is the beginning of the end, or perhaps it isn't. The message to us is the same, that we worship God in spirit and in truth. And we know through scriptures that without the infilling of the Holy Ghost, that's not possible. You can't do that. You can't worship him in spirit if you don't have his spirit. So, once we've been obedient to God and been born again, our next job then is to preach the gospel, isn't it? To preach the good news. There's not a lot of good news out there in the world today, but we have some to share. So I guess the onus is on us now to preach his message, to tell people, to give them a warning of what is to come. And he's called us unto this great work, the latter rain, the Bible describes it as, or the last great harvest before he comes to take us home. So, knowing these things, let's be bold, let's be courageous, and let's be faithful, and let's share the good news. Freely we've been given, freely give, the Bible says. And if we don't tell these people these things, who is? There's a lot, like you've just seen it tonight, there's a lot of stuff out there that you can find and look up and so easily be confused unless you know the truth for yourself. So, yeah, I'll leave it there. Amen. Sorry that was so long. Thanks for bearing with me, but there was a lot to get through. We're going to have a time of prayer now, yes?